Hey Danny, how are you doing today?
Good, Don. How are you today?
Fantastic. So here we are back with the church guy in the attic for another what we're calling bite-sized videos, trying to deal with some of the issues that church people like myself have when we're trying to help people with addictions. And so anyway, my name's Don, and I'm the church guy.
And I'm Danny, and I'm the addict.
So Danny, today we're going to talk about ground rules.
Okay.
And it's interesting because I don't know if you like the term or not, but one of the situations that often arises is you'll end up in a relationship with somebody and you're trying to help them with their addiction, and then they'll ask you for money, or they'll ask you if they can live with you, or they ask you if you can pay their bills, or they ask you, if they can drive you all around town for a whole day. And so if you're in a relationship from a church guy's point of view, you feel like you've got to do everything you can to help this person.
Exactly.
And so I was thinking, if you could establish ground rules
Okay.
from the
Uh,
beginning, when would you introduce those ground rules? Do you call them ground rules? Is there a better way of explaining it, or when do you have the conversation?
well, I think very early in the relationship, you should have some sort of rules. Um, and everybody in recovery is different than others. Like the way you would help Frank isn't the way you would help John. Everybody's different, and everybody's uniquely different in the sense that some things that works for Danny, uh, whether it's some people need to be firm, like no, and yelled at or screamed at to get well. Whereas myself, I needed to be spoken to very calmly and gently and with a lot of love. So everybody's different, but in terms of finances and places to live and stuff like this, those ground rules should be set very early in the relationship.
But how do
Yes.
you do that, Danny? Like you meet somebody at church, and maybe you know that they're going to AA meetings at your church, and so you go out for breakfast after church with them or something like that, and then a couple of weeks later you're having a relationship. Well, in a normal relationship, you don't sit your new friend down, and say we need some ground rules.
Well, no, you don't. But in the same breath, it's like, you and I have known each other for many years now, and I've never once asked you even for $5, let's say.
That's
You
right.
know what I mean?
We
So,
never set we never set those ground rules, Danny.
no, because they weren't needed. You know what
Right.
I mean? Or vice versa. You never came to me saying, "Hey, Dan, can I borrow $5 or whatever?" But
Yeah.
my point is, when we see this happening, then we know the relationship is turning in a different mode. Because see, what people who have addictions do is they take advantage of those who are not in the know, if you will. And
Okay.
and most church people would say, well, what would Jesus do? Oh yeah, sure, I loan him the money. And but we got to remember, are we enabling the person? you know Even if you went out and bought $200 worth of groceries, that gives that person $200 of their own money that they could use to drink or drive.
You mean they could sell the groceries?
Or they have like a certain amount of money that they would normally purchase groceries with.
Oh, I
You know
see.
what I'm saying?
So you're freeing up
So
their budget. You're freeing up their budget by $200 by buying them
exactly,
groceries, and then they have the
exactly,
cash for drugs.
right,
So this
right.
is a pretty complex discussion then when you think about it, because how would I know when somebody actually needs like diapers for their baby,
Right.
or food for their baby, versus they're asking me for $40 to go and get a high. Like, how do I know?
Right. Well, normally in a situation like that, there might be another spouse who's a healthy person, who's watching out for the baby, and maybe you could talk to her. We're assuming it's a her, to ask, how can I help with little Ella or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that way, it's purchased for the baby with no receipts. You rip open the diaper bag so they can't return it. little
Right.
things like that, just knowing to rip open the bag so it's open, and then that way it's non-refundable kind of thing.
Hmm.
So it's different that way. But I mean, like, you never know, no. But 9 times out of 10, if you just met someone and it's a new relationship and they're asking you for money, it's normally not a good relationship to be in or to
Right.
have. As much as we want to help, it's normally not a good thing.
Why is it so difficult to say no to somebody when they ask you for money?
It's
Like,
no
I'm sure
problem
you
for
have
me.
people ask you for money.
I
Hmm?
do it all the time. I say, "What do I look like? The Bank of Danny?" You know, and I
So you
say,
get
"Well,
asked and you say no.
no." And I say, "Well, think of it like a bank." I often say to someone, I'll say, "Well, Don, why don't you just go to the bank and ask them?" And they say, "Well, I can't go to the bank. I've got bad credit." And I say, "Well, if the bank is saying to you, you got bad credit, you know you got bad credit. Why would I loan you money to know I'm not going to get it back?" It's very simple, right? And
Right.
so if I'm going to give, if I'm going to quote unquote loan somebody money, it'll be money that I'm giving them and not expecting to be returned. But it's not a whole whack of money. Don't get me
Hmm.
wrong, Don. You know what I mean? It might be just something that's $20 and that's it. And then I expecting not to get it back, even though they're saying, "Oh, I promise I'll pay you on Wednesday. I'll pay you on Wednesday." And in
Yeah.
my mind and my heart, I know I'm not getting that money back.
Right.
So I'll loan it in that fashion. But normally I don't even do that because I don't want to enable people to get what they need to get. I worked in a church for many years, as you know, and we used to give out food vouchers. And I used to say the same thing about that we're enabling people, that we should not be doing this,
Really?
because even if you're giving someone $20, how far does $20 get you at a grocery store? Other than some peanut butter and some toast bread and whatever, you know
One
what I
bag,
mean?
basically.
It's not going to get you nothing, really. So really, you're not really helping out, and I think something that's good that really helps out someone who's struggling for food or something like that is a place like Loaves and Fishes, where you could buy a meal for someone for like $1, or buy them the Loaves and Fishes card. I believe it's like $5, but you get 6 dinners. Stuff like that would really help someone who's in need of food, or because when they're saying, "Oh, I have no food," these are perfect places. And then the lunch thing at Common Ground, right?
Right.
Same deal, right? And that's a free lunch. It doesn't cost them anything. So when you're guiding people who are quote unquote hungry, because that's the excuse they're going to use, "I'm
Yeah.
hungry," we got to look for places that'll feed them. And places like that'll feed them. And it's not coming really out of your pocket. It's something that's, and places like the food bank where they can go get,
Yeah.
some groceries and stuff like this. But that should be, knowing the avenues basically is what I'm saying, is where to send people who are in need.
So
And so that way,
generally speaking, Danny, would you say that if an addict asks me for money, church guy, that's a red flag? Would you see that as a red flag then?
oh, most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Because most people too, that's the other thing too. Most people would say, "Hey, Don, I'm short of money. Can I cut your grass for $10?" Something like that. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Where it's a bartered system trade-off, if you will.
Mhm.
It's not just, "Or can I shovel your snow for like a month or whatever for $30 or something?" Like there's got to be some sort of trade-off. So they're not.
Is there something about a $40 loan?
Oh yeah, $40 are not good, because $40 is a 40 piece. But anyway, so
Okay.
basically, getting back to what we were talking about before, we need to have avenues where to send um, those in recovery, who are quote
Yeah.
unquote hungry for food, rather than going out to the store, filling their fridge. And actually, Don, I think you got a great story about the time where you were a manager of a store and
Yeah.
one of your friends. Uh, could you please share that one, Don?
Yeah. So I was the general manager of a furniture store, And a friend of mine came in with somebody who was a recovering addict and bought a bed for him, like a mattress and box spring, paid over $1,000 for it. He wanted him to get a really good bed. And the following week, this the addict came back into the store, and I got called down to the front desk. He was trying to return the merchandise for a cash refund, and this had been I had been involved in the transaction because it was a friend of mine making the purchase. And I said, well, I can't just refund you for this mat and box spring because I know who paid for it. And the only way would be if he came in, he paid by check and I'd have to refund him by check as well. And so I had to turn him away. But that was an example of somebody who was taking advantage of somebody's generosity and coming in the following week and thought they'd walk away with $1,100.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
We can't, sure, we want to help people, but we don't want to enable people. And we want those who are church people to have tools. That's why we're doing this, to have tools for them to be able to know. They might have seen this video, let's say, and say,
Right.
oh, hey, this is a red flag here. This guy's asking me for money, and we've just met. We've just met. So
Yeah.
what is he saying he needs the money for? And we both have a friend who's been sleeping on a floor for I don't know how many months. We'll say about 6 months or something like that. And then finally he got a little bit of a windfall from the government, and finally bought himself a futon. So
Mm.
and I'm one to say it won't kill you sleeping on the floor. I've done it many times. That's why I'm grateful today. I have a bed to sleep on, or on a couch, or
Yeah.
whatever. But anyway, that's off topic. But
But I think
the other
I think
thing is,
it's I think it's important to say two things. Number one is that if somebody's asking you for money, you know they're dealing with addictions, then you should say no. Saying yes is not helpful. And at the very most, you should, or at the very least, maybe you should do is question them about the need. You're saying that it's okay to say, why do you need the money? And maybe there's another way that I can help
exactly,
you. Right. Now, there's
exactly.
the other question, Danny, and I was working with somebody a number of years ago, and they had asked me to help them be accountable to their budget. So I held their money for them. Like they had a check that was coming to them, I would cash the check for them. And then every time they needed money, like I'd pay their rent, get them groceries using their own money. Is that an acceptable practice in your opinion?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful because a lot of triggers for those who are in addiction is just having money. Period.
Right.
And as for myself, I did exact same thing. I was living in a treatment center, and I got the job at the church, and I was working at the church, and they would give me a paycheck, and I did the same thing. I would give my sponsor the paycheck. We would go to the bank together. We would deposit it. He'd have the bank card, and every time I needed money, I would have to tell him why I needed the money.
Mm.
Uh, as well as what I did was I had a little allowance, meaning $5 in my pocket is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about even $20 was too much in the beginning,
Yeah.
because that's enough to get into trouble. But he would give me some walking around money. So if there was something I liked or something I saw or whatever, I was able to buy it, or even a coffee or a tea or what have you. But I think that's a beautiful practice because most of us who have issues in addiction are horrible financially. Like when we have money, that's one of the worst things that can happen to us. And if you work at if you've worked at different places like I have, you can normally tell the people who are addicts or alcoholics because they get their first paycheck and they never come back.
When
So
we
it's,
started, when you mentioned the word trigger, can you kind of explain what a trigger is, Dan?
Well, basically, a trigger is something that triggers you to go out to get your drug of choice, whether alcohol or drugs. Uh, Finances is one thing. Another trigger could be something, if you're an IV user and you see a needle on the ground, that could be a trigger. If you're a cocaine addict and you, let's say, walked into the kitchen and somebody was baking some goods and there was a whole bunch of white powdery substances around, that
Mm,
could be a trigger. Like there's so many different triggers that can trigger people. But once again, as for, I can only speak for myself, but the longer I'm in the program, the less and less these triggers happen. But very new in recovery, just the simple smell of alcohol on someone's breath, or weed being smoked in the air, is
yeah,
enough of a trigger. And that's why in recovery they always say, if you're going to help another man, let's say, we're going to Frank's house because Frank needs help with his alcoholism. I don't go to Frank's house by myself, because I might go there and Frank might offer me a beer or crack or whatever the man's addiction is. You always go with two, because
mm,
that way the two of you can keep each other accountable. You
mm,
know what I mean? And then that way, we can do what we're supposed to do to help the fellow person, because it's not uncommon, and I've heard it with people that I've helped, where one person would go to the home and then end up being smoking crack with Frank or whatever the Frank's addiction was. And
yeah,
then, then they talk to you and I said, well, what happened? And they said, well, I went there and I smelt this. Oh, and I fell in love with the smell again, and I just couldn't help myself, and they offered me, and blah, 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 blah. And then I say, well, rule number one, you're always supposed to go in twos. You knew that, you know that, and that's why they say you always go in two. And just like the time when we helped our friend there, we went together. We went in twos, you
yeah.
know. Yeah.
So just in a recap then for what we've discussed, from what I'm understanding or hearing from you is ground rules are not necessarily firm, and they're not really ground rules because they're different for everybody. They're different people, different personalities, different circumstances and situations. But you just have to be aware of some of the red flags. So if somebody starts asking you for money, somebody start telling you they have a bill to pay, things like anything that triggers that they're going to ask you for money or sounds like they're going to ask you for money is a problem. And then helping people with their finances is certainly a way not to say no. You can say, look, I won't lend you money. I can't lend you money. Like you said, I'm not the bank of Danny, but I will help you with your finances, with your budget, really,
Mhm.
be a part of your financial life. That could be very helpful. Um, and then just also be aware that going out and buying people groceries is not like the church people, me as a church guy, thinks that's the ultimate. Go out and go grocery shopping, but what you're doing is you're actually giving them $200 of their own budget to buy drugs. So you'd be better if you find out the problem really is that there's hunger there, send them to somewhere where they can get a meal. And so do things that are more practical. Would you say that's fair?
That's fair, yeah. And I would say simple guidelines we could use rather than ground rules, but
Okay,
ground
guidelines
rules
is
are fine.
probably a better, yeah.
Yeah, but once again, getting back to, we want to help who's ever hurting. That's our goal, you know.
Right.
And if we're throwing money at them or groceries at them, uh, I don't really think we're helping them. It's the old saying, if you want to teach a man to fish, you buy him a fishing pole, but then you teach him how to
Right.
fish on his own or whatever. I'm not sure how it goes, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
You
Because even
teach
in
him
a,
how to fish.
and also I think it's probably fair to say that if it's something that's not in a normal relationship, like my friends aren't borrowing money from me all the time, and I'm not out there borrowing money from people. So I think you said that right off the beginning. You've never asked me to lend you money, and I've never asked you. That's a normal relationship. But when something comes up that's out of the normal, that's when we need to
Mm.
pay attention. And when we're dealing with people with addictions, it's good to be aware of that, to say, okay, this is where we put the brakes on. I like guidelines better than ground rules, Danny. And I think it makes sense because you have to have guidelines for everything in your life.
Mhm.
In our own finances, there's things that we do to help us get direction in life, and then we all need guidelines. So anyway, I think that's probably pretty well covers this subject now, because we don't want to beat it to death,
No,
but we really want. I think it's really important to have the conversation. And the other thing is that if people have questions, further questions about this subject or anything at all, they can email us at the church guy in the attic at gmail.com, all lowercase. So the church guy and the addict at gmail.com. And as we get questions, we can answer them in our conversations as well. So anyway, thanks a lot for the discussion today, Danny. That was great.
and I hope we hear from you.
Fantastic.
God bless, my friend.
Okay, Danny, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Peace. Bye-bye.